Welcome to You Can Talk to Me, a Beatles podcast. It's time to make our way across the universe and talk all things John, Paul, George and Ringo.
Les, thank you for joining me here on the podcast. Great to be able to sit with you.
Pleasure.
I have a number of questions that I'm very keen to ask you, but before I get too far ahead of myself, can I go back in time? I'd love to know how film hit you and when that was and what it did for you. Do you have a memory of that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, basically, when did I fall in love with cinematography? Very slowly. I had a dad who was your classic 1930s, 40s, 50s film buff. I think he taught me to walk at 9 months because in those days, handheld children couldn't go into a cinema. So I was made to walk. So Dad was a cinema fan, and he brought myself and my two brothers. We're all into that. At one time, my two brothers were projectionists at the two cinemas in our little town. So we grew up in a way in a appreciative zone, not in an artistic way, just in a fan way. Just 5 miles from us was the Rank Organisation Processing Laboratory, which was, 400 people working on processing film. It was massive. My two brothers got jobs there. And eventually, when I left school, I got a job there too. So 3.5 years I'm into there. Then off I go, love of my life, around Europe doing walkabout. I come back a couple of months later, no job, no girlfriend. And my brother rings me up and says, there seems to be a massive shortage of people coming into the industry wanting to be clapper loaders. Well, I sort of vaguely knew what a clapper loader was. But the one thing I had was I knew how to handle film. 3 days after I started there, I realized this was the world. Not in a love of cinematography, not in a way, but this was just, oh, wow. I did know how to handle film, which was, so I made a few phone calls. Got an interview with Jerry and Sylvia Anderson down making Thunderbirds. And so, yeah, lucky me, I got a job there. 3 days after joining, I looked around the floor one morning and I thought, this is a magic world. Now that wasn't my burning bush moment for cinematography, but it was my burning bush moment for the film industry. And it was just great. It was a wonderful place to learn because the cinematic tricks that were used to make these puppets, which were yay high, as human as possible, it was just magic. And we were shooting in big 35mm film too. So it was the best grounding anyone wanting to be in camera work could have had. So after about 18 months, I felt cocky enough to go freelance. And so for the next 6 years, I was a freelance clapper loader. And then I sort of, you gradually get pressured, and I moved into the next rung up, the first camera system, which is a focus puller, which in those days, because half of the cameras we were using were non-reflex. So the focus when you were actually recording film could not be seen through the lens. And it wasn't until the rushes came back did you know if it was in focus or not. So that was a massive pressure job. Totally, it was your classic plumber of the industry. Everything going great, no one's aware of you. When it goes wrong, everyone's covered in it.
Yes.
So it was again, I was a focus puller for about 7 years. So after about 14, 15 years, that's when maybe the seed started to grow that, could I go further? Could I maybe go, wow, could I be an operator? Could I be the guy standing next to God, a cameraman?
Yeah.
And these were huge, huge leaps. So far, I'd wanted to be a successful camera assistant to get work, the good work, nice work, and just be well thought of as a camera assistant, no more, no less. And, oh, Michael, when I look back, I was so lucky. I put the clapperboard in front of Maggie Smith, Peter Ustinov, David Niven, Bette Davis. These were just, even my wife the other day, after, we've been together a lot, she said, how did you ever get used to being with famous people? And I said, because everyone around you was okay. You just did what everyone else did. So um, it it was not a conscious thing, Michael. It was a job,
Mm.
and you were determined to do it as good as everyone around you. That was the motive. Somewhere along the line, in answer to your question, yeah, I fell in love with cinematography, and I have just had the best working career I could wish on anyone. I've just loved it.
I almost wanted to stop you and just dive into the Thunderbirds. I mean, that alone, the ground that was broken there, and which resonates to this day. You seem to be in the right place at the right time for these key moments in the shifting of culture as well.
Oh,
Uh,
do you know, Michael, you have just said something that is so pertinent and so true. Most of my life, I've been in that lucky eye of the storm and been carried along. I mean, uh, I came into the industry a massive change of equipment, of style, and I've witnessed it again and again. And I just somehow have, not by skill, talent, or choice, just by that wonderful happenstance, have been in that eye of the storm a lot of times. And
and you've
it's
obviously
just,
embraced that too. You've obviously been relatively open and fearless about embracing those opportunities. I'd love to go into that mid 60s period and get a sense of what that was like for you. You know, it was kind of the cultural center of the universe there, the swinging 60s
oh,
and central London. How alive was that period as you remember it?
massive, massive. My brothers were born, my brothers are 10 and 12 years older, born in the 30s. Now, their life was almost prescribed by the decade. So they left school at 15. At 17, national service for 2 years. Come out from national service where your job had to be held for you. Um, and pretty much it was expected, demanded, you're going to be married within 3 years. And then basically, why within the next 3 years haven't you started a family, etc., etc., etc. So all their life they were, even their sort of wardrobe was prescribed. Well, um, I put my first pair of Levi's on in about 1962, and proverbially I haven't taken them off since. The world changed. So, I mean, the 5 year apprenticeship that most kids were going to into school was on the fade because um, people could go into sort of retail and these new entertainment worlds and be paid, you know, serious money from the off. Um, I mean, my brothers and their wife, and they were going still to dance. I mean, even if you think, go back to the 50s, and if you look at Bill Haley and even Elvis Presley's band, they still had big double basses, and they still had things like saxophones. Then suddenly, this Beatle and the rest, four guys, kit of drums and three guitars, and they are filling the biggest auditoriums with this wonderful raw noise. I mean, if you weren't dancing when they played Twist and Shout, you might as well, you weren't in it. So it was just, everything about it was so vibrant and so absolutely new.
Yeah.
Um, the pirate radio ships in the North Sea. I mean, the BBC were playing something like 2 hours of pop music, and the pop music shows were being presented by ex-band leaders from the 40s.
Mm.
I remember one of them absolutely looking at the ground and saying, I can't believe this next number we're about to play. They were in the recording studio for 80 hours. And he was talking about the Beach Boys' Good Vibration. It was it was just unknown to that previous generation.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, or Blueberry Hill doesn't actually get your blood boiling. And that was the era. So
Yeah.
when the Beatles burst through and all the other Mersey Beat and this whole four guy thing, it was just mind blowing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so. it was just so vibrant. And really, the young were turning around and just saying to the old, they said, no, sorry, your rules, I'm sorry, I don't need your rules.
Yes.
And it took, it took that 15 years. And I mean, Britain was so depressing in the 50s. I mean, they were, when you think Britain was the last place to end World War II rationing.
Mm.
I mean, it was still, and it was still such a grey place in so many ways. I mean, the pubs only open for 2 hours on a Sunday, and it
Mm.
was just everything. I mean, um, everything was deemed to be a privilege. Oh, you want a telephone? Well, what's your reason for wanting a telephone? And it went on and on and on.
In that melting pot, that mid-60s period, I'd like to talk about two people that came into your orbit and how that happened and what they meant to you. The first is Tony Richmond. And I was just curious about Tony. Correct me if I have this wrong. I read a quote from you. The old guard treated Tony with a certain amount of scorn. And he had balls the size of Albert Hall. He wasn't afraid of anything. Is that quite accurate? And is that how you remember him?
Absolutely accurate, mate. The old guard, see, I mean, prior to, let's say, 1960, there were no freelance camera people, really. Most of them worked through a studio or, Pinewood, Shepperton, or Technicolor itself. Because all the equipment was owned by the studios. Then slowly, these little people started to rent cameras so that you didn't need a studio, you rented a camera. So you then rented people. Now, Tony came in the industry in a very traditional way. He was a clapper loader. He was Nick Rogue's focus puller for a long time. Then Tony was offered a chance at a very young age to light a feature film. And I mean, the old guard used to call him the clapper lighter. They were in scorn that someone in their 20s could deem to be a cameraman. And he proves them wrong. And Tony was, as I say, he really just took life and just did not care. He knew what he was going, and he was very charismatic. And like us all, he had a Beatle haircut and everything else. But he no, he was unafraid. He didn't have that DNA in him that says, "Oh, I wonder if I should do this." No, his DNA was, "Why wouldn't I do it?"
Yeah. And he obviously goes on to become DOP on the Let It Be project and many before that in that scene with the Stones and so on. If I could also then ask, was it around the same time you became aware of Tony that you were introduced to Michael Lindsay Hogg? And how did Michael come into your orbit?
Very much so. Again, that was through Tony. I was trying to actually pin. I think the first time I'd met Michael Lindsay Hogg was when we were shooting the music clip for Jumping Jack Flash. Bear in mind, music clips in those days were a total different beast to what they've become on MTV. Effectively, big bands, were asked to go all around the world and appear on television, and they obviously couldn't do them all, and they, for all sorts of reasons, so they would make a video clip of their latest recording, which was sent to the TV station, which the TV stations paid for as if it was a live performance. So a lot of those, I mean, if you look back at the early ABBA, they were massive productions. So the Jumping Jack Flash was but again, like all, we would get called to the studio at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but we wouldn't leave there before dawn the next day most times. Yeah. They were not morning people, our pop stars. So Michael Lindsay Hogg, I vaguely may have known. He was very instrumental in one of probably the leading television pop show, Ready, Steady, Go, made out of London. And so he was a TV studio 4-camera, sit up in the control room type director. His directorship, they didn't come on the floor, they stayed in the control room. Michael was not a floor film style director. He was a TV director. So we did Jumping Jack Flash. I don't know where, again, I've read in chats with Mick Jagger. where the whole idea came from. I know Mick Jagger, they always wanted to. The Beatles did all these big shows and magic movie, mystery tour, and so the Stones were a little bit frustrated. They wanted something in that vein. So this rolling rock and roll. So Michael Lindsay Hogg comes along, and they're going to shoot it like a video with 4 pedestal cameras, but they want the film look. So over from France comes these pedestals, look like studio video cameras, but inside is a 16mm camera. So although they're going to shoot everything like it's TV, it's going to be recorded and edited on film. So the first thing Tony says to me, we're going to go over and shoot at this place, this Intertel TV. Can you go over tomorrow and start the pre-light? So, okay. So I've gone over, and of course, these are Intertel as manned by video TV personnel. So the first thing they look at me and say, well, we'll need a lighting plan that tells us where every lamp's going. I said, well, you're not going to get that. I said, that's not the way we work. Well, that's the way we work. So we're not doing anything till you give us a lighting plan. Now, these guys didn't understand Michael Lindsay Hogg wanted Tony. Mick Jagger wanted Tony. And so Tony soon pointed out the error of their ways and told them, there won't be a lighting plan. There'll be me telling you where to put the lights.
Mm-hmm.
But the other big mistake they made, which was they had overlooked the fact the cameras had to be reloaded every 11 minutes. They were all used to doing 2 or 3 runs of a number straight off. And so by the time we finished the last recording, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. Most of the teenagers, the fans had gone home. We were struggling to put crew in the robes to fill the background.
Right.
It was the last gig poor Brian Jones did. Again, the studio was what we call a 4-waller. You just rented the space, and there was a canteen, but it was catering. And I'm in the canteen one day, again, just because I was there. There's Brian Jones, there's Keith Richards and Charlie Watson. I'm just standing on there, all drinking the coffee. And Brian Jones looked around at these 13, 14, 15-year-old teenagers and said, oh, God, he said, is this our fan base? And he was absolutely dismayed that their fan base for what was going to be this big gig was, teenagers, youngsters. Who, again, by the time, they all were drifting off by 10 o'clock at night. So, it was, but there was no 2 ways. On the night when we were shooting it, it was Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger had literally, it was his force of personality that brought all of these people together, produced the whole thing.
I'm wondering, were you there at the time where the Dirty Mac is formed? You've got John Lennon on lead vocals, Eric Clapton on guitar. We got Keith Richards on bass, Mitch Mitchell from the Jimi Hendrix Experience on drums, and Yoko. Do you have a recollection of that particular part of the rock and roll circus?
I wish I could say I did, Michael, but I was on a roving. So we had the 4 studio cameras, and I was on a roving handheld camera doing all that sort of tight of the drums, getting in amongst the band and doing all the stuff.
Right.
So, yes, I was there filming it for sure. Do I have a recollection, anything anecdotal about that moment? No. I was too busy getting my headroom and my focus. I think the next thing was the Let It Be. Tony rang me and said, look, we've got a gig with the Beatles. So this is the end of the 60s. So, right. Of course, I knew the Beatles. Of course, it was. But more important, Tony had asked me, I want you to operate on this rather than be camera assistant. So I went into the whole Let It Be, Get Back, filming the Beatles, more concerned that I didn't screw up as an operator than working with the Beatles. It's hard to put this into context, Michael. It wasn't that we were cocky. It was just that we were focused on doing our job. Our job entailed working with famous people. Who we knew, we respected, we were in all normal fan awe of, but we had that job to do.
Yes.
And overused word, being professionals, that's what we were there to do.
And you have this period from January the 2nd through to Jan 14 at Twickenham Studios.
Yeah.
Can you describe the feeling and the mood in that space? Do you have a sense of that?
Oh, yeah. There's probably nothing as bleak as an empty soundstage. If you think a pub at 7 o'clock in the morning that isn't open is bleak, a soundstage with nothing in it is just awful. I mean, there's this three basketball court size place. It's sort of 3 stories high and it's cold and it's bleak. And so I turn up there the first morning, the camera equipment's been delivered, I mean, the lighting's been delivered. And Mal, the roadie, was already setting up some of the instruments and the whole amp thing, and our sound people. Now, at that time, bear in mind, there was no um, studio music sound recording. There was only tape recorders belonging to the film. The actual 16-track, 8-track recording didn't start till we moved on to Abbey. So we're sitting around there. Tony had said to me, "Look, I don't know what we're into." He said, "I think that we're going to make a film of them getting ready to do a concert, but we just got to see." He said, "Look, it is the Beatles. I don't know how long we're going." He said, "Oh, by the way, when you do your deal, go in strong." I thought, "Go, okay." So we used to do deals where you'd come up with an all-in deal, which was no matter what hours you paid, you got that figure. So again, this is going to come over as maybe a bit arrogant, but in those days, let's say a high street bank manager was probably making 80 or 90 pounds. So my first thing was I asked for 140. And the producer, because they're all producers, said, "Okay, I'll offer you 128, but guarantee you 3 weeks." So I'm pretty happy with that.
Nice.
So we get there and the Beatles arrive and Michael, and it's all sitting around and chit chatting. We're not quite sure. And then Tony starts to put some lights up. Now, if you think, irrespective of how technical you are, let's just say video has a capability to record because it has a recording speed of 2400. Doesn't matter what I'm talking, 2400 carats, 2400, whatever. Film in those days had a speed of 100. So it needed lights. I mean, so Tony had this idea, each day he would add an extra light or two just so there was a transition as they moved forward. They started then to rehearse numbers and present numbers. There was a lot of chit chat going on, which you can hear on the films, but generally speaking, I was on a lens some distance away, so I could see them, but I couldn't necessarily hear them.
Right.
So when people, a lot of them, "Oh, what did you think when they?" Well, probably 60% of what they said was beyond my hearing because I was on that. We wanted that isolation of long lens. So there was. It slowly we moved forward, and I'm not quite sure when, but one little incident. Paul realised that Twickenham Studio was on the same bus route as the bus that stopped outside of his house in North London. So he thought, "I'll get the bus one day." So he got on the bus at his house. And in those days, the buses had a driver and a conductor. And can you believe the conductor said, "What are you doing on my bus?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Twickenham." He said, "No, no, no. This bus is for working class people. Rich toffs like you shouldn't be on my bus. Get off."
Wow.
So, I mean, really, just funny stuff like that was
Yeah.
happening. Then this idea came up. Very heavily pushed by Michael Lindsay Hogg because he wanted a big gig concert, obviously, as the climax of this. So they started to talk about this Roman amphitheatre in North Africa, right? How are we going to get there? Well, I tell you what, we could hire a little liner and put and put all the gear and everything, and we could also take, of course, 1,000 fans with us because we want to fill the Roman amphitheatre with 1,000 people in robes as an audience. And so we're going to put everyone on a boat. And then someone said, the insurance on that is going to be more than the film. So that idea didn't go very far. So how can we get to North Africa? Then George just suddenly, and he sort of half said it looking at the camera as well. And he said, give this American Air Force general a ring over in East Anglia. He said he'll always help us out. Okay. So somebody rang this American Air Force general in East Anglia, and they said, we're making a film for the Beatles, and we're wondering, oh, I love those guys. They did so much stuff for one of our kids' charities. I'll do anything for the Beatles. Well, we're trying to work a way of getting the crew and gear to North Africa, where there's this. He said, look, hey, that's no problem. He said, look, how much gear you got? So 150 tons or whatever it was. One of our skylifters will take that in a day. No worries. He said, we've got a base, just 80 mile up the road from where you want to film. We can just get a convoy. I'll turn it all into an exercise. No problem. So the Americans were going to ship us down there.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. And all I could think about was, holy Christ, I was thinking about my job.
Yeah.
But this was growing and growing. I mean, one day I'm actually in the gents, and Paul comes in, and Paul's at the next urinal, and he looks at me and says, what do you think about this idea of North Africa? Well, yeah. He said, no, do you think it could work? I said, well, if Michael and Tony think it will, I'm sure I guess so. Anyway, Paul goes off. Out of one of the cubicles comes Tony. And he said, don't get involved in those conversations. Don't do. He said, if Michael thought you weren't fully behind it, don't get involved. Okay. Anyway, so the idea is growing. Then every day, of course, because we're filming rushes and we don't have there's no feedback on the day. We have to wait the next day for rushes. So most mornings we all go up and watch rushes at 11 o'clock. So it's almost a done deal, this going to North Africa with the American Air Force. And so we come out of rushes one day, and Yoko Ono, who I'd never heard speak up until this point, and most days she was sitting at the feet of John Lennon, reading clippings sent to her from around the world, mainly on the Beatles. And Paul explained it to us all one time. He said, John and Yoko like being together. So they like being in each other's company. And if they're in each other's company, they like being in physical contact. So that's the way it is. Okay. Anyway, we come out of rushes this one day, and Yoko simply says, after Share Stadium and 100,000 people, everything else sucks. Okay, right, fine. And that put a line under the page of going to North Africa. Just that one. Now, there may have been other things said.
Sure.
Like most of the times, I'm only aware of what I heard. There was a lot of other stuff going on. I mean, I'm sure phone calls and stuff. I believe I learned from the Peter Jackson film that apparently the sound department had even put a mic in the canteen.
Mm-hmm.
But that was, again, unknown to yours truly. I had never heard of that till. I can only assume it did happen.
Well, maybe in that space, could I ask you a question, Les? When the Peter Jackson project was released and you were going through looking at that production, did it make revelations to you that you'd like that you weren't aware? Did you have a number of revelations that broadened out the experience for you?
A few, not too many. I mean, the biggest problem was when the original Let It Be came out, and everyone's talking about the breakup of the Beatles and this, and I'm thinking, well, bucket if I saw it. And what I do admire about a Peter Jackson film, it doesn't show the breakup of the Beatles. It shows the Beatles in close collaboration, this, that, and the other. And apart from the quality, the restoration that Peter Jackson people have done on that, it's better than what we originally saw. I mean, we're only shooting on what we called standard 16 mil. A 16 mil frame is pretty well smaller than a postage stamp. And Peter Jackson managed to turn it into an absolute beautiful piece of film. So no, there weren't too many revelations in that way, Michael. But it was a confirmation of what we saw and what we happened. Whereas the Let It Be, which was all about the breakup, which happened actually months after, of course, we were filming, and the first edit of Let It Be, they only had something like 6 tracks on a 16 track, which Phil Spector had finally engineered. And so they gave basically the soundtrack to an editor and said, cut pictures to this.
Mm-hmm.
So the first film, to be honest, was a total travesty as a record of what went on.
Sure.
History owes a debt of gratitude to the revamp and the working and the editing by Peter Jackson's crew, because that is an accurate record of what was going on day by day.
That's wonderful to hear. There's a line I heard some time ago, and I think it's been repeated by people throughout the decades, that when you had one Beatle in a room, there was a certain kind of energy. And then when you had 2, that energy shifted and became something different. But when you had 4, it was almost this other thing happened. There were 4 points of a square, and you were kind of on the outside now looking in. What was your experience with them as individuals and them also as a gang?
By the time we were filming the Beatles, they'd probably been in each other's company for 10 years. They knew each other's. There was lots of things that didn't need to be said. It took a little while, but by the time, Twickenham, they were still very conscious of the cameras to a degree. By the time we moved into Apple headquarters, we'd more or less become invisible. So it was a different environment there. But the dynamic of them, there wasn't a lot of chit chat between them. They would come in and sort of remain in their own little zones most of the time. But the only people who discussed the music was Paul and George would have a few discussions. There's the famous sequence where George is saying, well, I'll play whatever you want. That was very rare. It was really, I never, ever heard anyone make any comment to Ringo about how he should play the drums. Never. So a lot of that, that was just basically coming out of 10 years. They knew what they knew. So George at one point said to Mal the roadie, can you get me a Hammond organ amp to play his guitar through? And then George was doing all Hawaiian guitar, with the metal tubes on his fingers. And it really sounded very un-Beatle. And I said to Mal, is he going to actually do that? I said, maybe, maybe not. He said, he'll play with it, he'll experiment with it for 2 or 3 days and then use it or drop it. He said, that's the way it evolves. They just experiment. And then there was for Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Mal the roadie had to go and hire a blacksmith's anvil.
Yes.
And I said to Mal, does that often happen? He said, oh yeah. He said, they can come up with all sorts of weird things. I have to go out and get with the shopping bag and get it.
What are your memories of Mal as a person?
He was one of those people who had found his spot, was dedicated to his spot, and didn't give a rat's toss what the world thought of him. Yeah. Was he a sycophantic handmaiden? He didn't care. He was there as their roadie. Their whatever they wanted of him, Mal was there. They're those sort of rare people who are the best wingmen, the best backup, the best backstop, because they are fulfilled by doing that role without concern of how they're perceived outside. Yeah. No, he was a big bloke too, but he was just amazing. And you could tell though that what made it work for him was the respect the boys had for him.
Right.
You know, even when something was going wrong, oh, Mal, for Christ. But there was still a way that they would be, their exasperation was never against Mal,
Mm-hmm.
even though they were asking Mal to solve it. And you could sense that incredible mutual bonding and respect there. It was a wonderful thing to see, because I mean, I don't know what they paid Mal, but I mean, Mal was never going to make the money that a Beatle did,
Yeah.
but it was never a concern. You could tell that.
Well, the way that you were cutting deals for yourself, maybe you should have renegotiated on Mel's behalf.
Well, I mean, yeah, I tell you how clever I felt about that, Michael. On day three, having negotiated this nearly twice a bank manager's wage, the Beatle White Album went on sale in America.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was on the first on Apple label, Northern Songs Publishing. So the White Album on day one at $7 a pop sold 3 million copies.
Mm.
I showed them.
Yes, you did. When you get into Apple Studios and you're out of that cavernous space at
Yeah.
Twickenham, could you feel a shift in how things were moving, the energy? Did it feel like the project was becoming more cohesive? Did you see Michael begin to relax?
I think Michael couldn't believe that they got the train back on the track.
Mm.
We just got to I think it was a Friday at Twickenham, and they said, like, George is not coming in. He's gone back to see his mum, so we're just going to cancel filming for a moment. So I didn't really realise, and Tony said, "Oh, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll just stay in touch." And so we just wrapped Twickenham. Then a week later, they came back. We're moving into Apple the weekend before. Tony went in with a lighting team to put lights up in the Apple's down basement studio so we could point the camera any way and it was lit. So the sound guys set up their stuff and we moved in there with the cameras again. It was pretty, I mean, compared to Twickenham, it was quite a small space, but it was still, it was still probably, I guess the overall size of it was probably a badminton court and a bit. So to give you an idea of the space, again, there was a grand piano in there, the drum kit, and of course, which was they had their own 16-track recorder, which they just bought. So it was a total change. That was when Glenn Davis first appeared, the recording engineer, who looked more like a Beatle than a Beatle, and we started. It moved into a slightly different gear. There was more rehearsals of whole tracks and everything were going down. It was yes, there was a different sense of even though I didn't know what, I don't think anyone did, but there was now seemed to be a target, an outcome, whether it be just an album, was it going to be a concert, but there was something moving towards a finished product that wasn't. Twickenham was sort of more just rehearsals, getting back into the mode of being in each other's company in a very sterile environment. Apple was where they were at home and everyone. Secretaries would just pop in and look and go away and things. So it was their space for sure.
I'm just curious. You said something a little while back there that it was explained to you and the team that George was off to visit his mum, but of course we know that George left the band in those final days at Twickenham and had to, after a meeting with the boys, kind of be brought back in. Was that part of the line, I guess, the way that information was fed to you as a team to kind of keep everyone connected to the project, that this was still happening, rather than, hey, we don't know if George is coming back?
Well, they did say that. We're not sure what's happening on the Friday. I mean, but it certainly George leaving the band wasn't really spoken of. It was just George isn't here he's going to take a break on what have you.
Yeah.
There was very much a need to know type atmosphere there. But certainly I don't recall I don't think I was aware, Michael, that anyone had said George has quit. It's just George has gone off to see his mum. He's taken a break or whatever. I don't recall. I'm pretty certain being aware that there was a possibility that George was no longer a Beatle. No.
Yeah.
So when they came back, I mean, there was no real atmosphere. They just came back and started going again. That was, of course, where though that conversation that was recorded between George and Paul. But you know, as I say, I never saw anyone talk to Ringo about it. But by the time that was a bit of an ego trip for me. Now, I wouldn't say any of the Beatles would have known my name, but they knew me.
Yeah.
So Ringo especially would come in each morning, go morning camera,
Yes.
and they were so relaxed with us by that time.
Yeah.
There was this another little thing. So you asked what sort of any special moments. Well, yeah, Paul in his bus ride.
Paul at the urinal.
Yeah, and Paul Yoko pulling the plug on Tunisia. And one day I could see Ringo was very involved at the back. He's doing something. And I got round closer and closer. And he was not bothered. And eventually I'm over his shoulder. And he's drawing a little black cartoon figure. So I think I said, I'll give up, Ringo. What are you doing? He said, well, we're home last night. And you know those Cadbury Black Magic ads where all the stunt guy does all the amazing things. He leaps buildings, he swims rivers, and then he ends up putting the box of black magic alongside the bed table. And it says, all because the lady loves. And we're watching that. And Maureen, his wife of the day, said, you never do anything like that for me. He said, well, tonight I'm going to put a box of black magic alongside her bed.
It's great.
And it was that time, you know, just it was. I've thought about it many times. Ringo had more money at this time than he would ever imagine was in the world, and he'd found. Well, they'd all found their own comfort zone with that riches and stuff. They were all aware of it, but it still never in a flash way. They had accepted that they were rich and famous, and would never need to have to worry about a dollar again. But it was there was remarkable lack of arrogance in any way, manner, shape, or form that you could witness in them. Although Paul, I mean, I remember George used to love doing these little asides to camera, you know, like ring the American general. Do you know why we got our OBEs? You look at the price of the pound. After we did America, the value of the pound went up. We got it for saving the sterling.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how aware George was.
Yeah.
And then George another time wanted some bit of kit from EMI. And he got Mal to go and get this bit of kit. And he said, and do you know why, camera? The EMI going to give me that bit of kit? You look at EMI shares before the Beatles and look at them now. So George was very into that type of it, but again, not arrogantly.
Yes.
And then one day, I say the sort of things that had happened backstage. So one day, we turn up, and there's this Afro-American gentleman sitting at the electric keyboard. I didn't know, so I had to go over to someone. I think it was the soundy, and say, "Who's that?" Billy Preston. Oh. So Billy Preston just turned up. And again, I don't know where or how or when Billy Preston was in, and he suddenly just turned up for a week and just was playing. Never saw a sheet of music.
Yeah, amazing.
Did
you feel the energy shift when he walked into that studio? And I'm wondering also from Michael's perspective, there's this complete shift. I think he was in town, if memory serves, shooting a thing for Lulu's variety show. And he happened to be in town. He'd played with them in Hamburg. George had said, come along. What did that feel like in the atmosphere of Apple when he turns up?
It was not as different as you'd imagine. He dovetailed in very well. But the Beatles and all of them, there was this keyboard guy who he was skinny, had Beatle haircut, looked like a pipe cleaner, would sit doing crosswords, and then they'd say, Nicky, come on, and this guy, Nicky Hopkins, would vamp on a piano to the Stones, He was just unsung genius.
One of the
So they
greats.
were all used to having a non-band member keyboard player who was accepted as an equal. Billy Preston fitted that. But there was one day, you never knew with John. He could come in as the larrikin beetle from the Merseyside, or he could come in as the pain struggling artisan, and you never knew which one was going to come in the door first. So one day he's in a bit of a bad mood, is the artisan, and he's playing this electric keyboard, and he said, "This keyboard's out of tune." And Billy Preston said, "Electric keyboards can't go out of tune." Holy fuck!
Yeah,
Sorry,
of
you
course.
just you just told John Lennon he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But it was done in such a delivery by Billy Preston that John said, "Oh, all right then, okay." But I thought, wow, and that's when I realised how much accord they all gave Billy Preston, that he could make a statement like that, saying, "John, you're talking bollocks," and not get away with it, but not mean anything other than electric keyboards don't go out of tune.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, again, it was this, as we said, Eye of the Storm again. I mean,
Yeah.
wow. Wow.
When you get to January 30, 1969, this is a milestone in cultural history and musical history. We're on the rooftop at number 3 Savile Row, central London. It's a cold day. Can you take us through a memory of what that day was like? Can you recall
yes.
the setup, where you were?
Well, I think the notion to film on the rooftop, probably, I don't know when it first started, but it probably took birth about 4 or 5 days before. First thing they had to do, because that was the building was built in like 18 whatever. So the first thing they had to do was bring a builder in to shore up the top ceiling so the roof wouldn't collapse. Then we had to talk about how we were going to get power up to there. A few things. Then we started to realize one 16mm film generally were what we call 400 foot, 120mm of film, which only ran for 11 minutes, and you had to then reload. Big factor. So we've been shooting on 2 cameras with those sort of loads. So we come in to do the concert, and we realized that we don't really want to stop. So there was another type of camera that we could use that had a 1,200 foot load. So basically, you'd be looking at 30 minutes, which we figured the concert wasn't going to go much more. So the first thing I had to do was organize, first of all, 4 cameras for the roof that could take these big loads, and then also get onto Kodak to make sure they had 1,200 foot loads in the same film stock we've been using. So for me, it was all about logistics. Then so we had 4 on the rooftop plus a hand, so 5 on the rooftop, and then there was another 5 cameras. Well, the night before, I'm at the rental company and I'm color taping every piece of a gear. This goes to the roof, this goes to the basement, so that when we got there the next morning, it wasn't chaos, because you suddenly got 11 crews turning up. So I needed to make sure that all the gear was going into the right space. So for me, it was the rooftop was a logistical challenge,
Right.
but it was just, again, it was what I was there for. They also figured that the police were going to bust it down, because the main Savile Row, which is the tailoring centre of London, also has Savile Row Police Station, which is West End Central, the main police station in central London. So it wasn't too hard to realise that they decided they're going to put a camera in the lobby and put it in a box. Somewhere the brief got misread. So instead of it being a small little box that could hide the camera, they came up with this massive room in the corner with a hole cut in it that the crew could get in the box as well. So this hidden box was about as subtle as a poke in the eye. And in fact, if you listen very carefully, when the two London bobbies did come in the front door, the first one comes in and he looks over and he just simply says out the corner of his mouth, "Stum camera."
Huh.
Which so the two cops knew they were being filmed the moment they came in. But classic London bobbies, press on. So for me, logistics, I was on a handheld camera once it got started downstairs, filming street reactions and waiting for the police to arrive. And then at the end, when it had all finished, which was amazing, but there was one other thing. They said, "Oh, do you think we could get a helicopter to film?" The minimum height of a helicopter in central London is 1,200 feet, 340 or 400 meters. I said, it won't be giving us very much. And so one of them said, "Oh, why don't you go and see Linda in accounts? Her uncle's got helicopters." Who has an uncle with helicopters?
Yes.
Turned out this was Linda Bristow, and her uncle ran Bristow's helicopter, the biggest helicopter fleet in Britain.
Right.
So there was all sorts of weird stuff used to. I say, I had the hurricane again, and I had the storm.
Remarkable.
It was very weird, that sort of stuff. So they did the number. Effectively, the street below couldn't hear it. City tower blocks half a mile away could hear it as clear as day. So it was an amazing event, and then the police had to stop because there'd been noise complaints and stuff, which eventually happened. But they got 3 of the numbers recorded, and so it all just wrapped up. And I do remember going around the building afterwards to make sure I'd got every piece of gear back and I walked through one of the rooms, and George was there with a couple of mates just having a drink and a smoke. And George just said, "How do you think it went?" I said, "It's very amazing." I said, "We're hearing that the tower blocks half a mile away could hear more than the street below." He said, "Well, that was the whole point. It wasn't for the people down below, it was for ourselves."
Right.
So, right, okay. But
Yeah.
as I say, it was yes, the Beatles knew me. Yes, I was known to the Beatles, but not, only because they recognized me behind the camera.
Of course. Were you based on the street for the entire performance, or did you move about?
I know I moved about once it got started. I mean, I had probably the most liberal role on the whole day in that I really could go anywhere. So that but once they started to record, there wasn't really much room on the roof for anyone who wasn't needed.
Right.
And Glenn Davis said they'd rigged up mic leads to go 5 floors down to where his 16 track. So Glenn was trying to mix something he couldn't even see.
Mm.
But I think in the end, I can't quote exact, but if say there were 12 tracks or 10 tracks on the original album, only 6 of them were, I think, on multi-track. The rest were culled from Nagras.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's one piece of amazing footage that even Peter Jackson hasn't really picked up on. In the original album, there was a little number called "Dig It," which only went for 28 seconds. But the reason was that, in a way, there's hardly anyone alive now who knows what was happening that day. We had a rule that the first Beatle came, the camera started rolling and the sound started, and we didn't stop until the last Beatle left, wherever. That's why there was something like 90 hours of film. So this day, I'd come back from lunch, and we were in Apple. The first Beatle to come back was John and Yoko. And this was when George was playing his guitar through the Hammond amp. So John picks up George's guitar and he starts vamping around. The next thing is George comes back, doesn't say it, but he just wanders over and picks up Paul's rhythm and he just starts vamping along. And then John starts these lyrics. Can you dig it? And he's vamping these lyrics. He's on George's call it Hawaiian guitar. George is on his Paul's acoustic. Then Ringo comes back, and Ringo gets on the grand piano, and he starts playing the piano. Finally, Paul comes back, and Paul goes on the drums. Now, this jam session lasted for nearly 28 minutes.
Right.
And it wasn't there. And at about 26 minutes, Michael, the manager, Neil, and Tony came back from lunch. So they had no idea that this had been going on for over 20 minutes. So effectively, there was only the crew, and we knew the extent of that vamp.
Yeah.
So there is still 28 minutes of a vamping number with every Beatle not on their own instrument, still sitting in that vault in West London.
Wow.
I actually got in touch with Apple and Michael, Lindsay Hogg, at when this started to kick off 2 years ago, and said, "You realise that this is in existence?" And they said, "Oh yeah, that's interesting." But I mean, I still think one day that nugget is going to come out as a freestanding piece of film that is going to really blow people away. The rhythm, the sound that these guys were producing off the top of their heads on that, it made the hairs on your neck stand up. You go, wow, this is what music and rock and roll is about, mate.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
When it was all said and done, did yourself, Michael, Tony, and the crew, were you uniquely aware that you'd completed something special that we'd still be talking about in 2025, there's that old line, right? Pain is temporary, film is forever.
No. And we had basically, yes, we'd completed the job. We'd done the shot on the roof. But no one knew what was going to happen to it. I mean, Let It Be didn't come out till 8 or 9 months later, and it was just released.
Right.
We'd all moved on. Had no idea that was going to be the end of the Beatles. We had absolutely no idea what we'd been part of. Over the years, many years, I suddenly realized again, wow, that was a unique experience. And apparently there's only 4 of us alive now, crew-wise, who were there every day of filming.
Didn't know that.
All the rest have split. Yeah, so once again, lucky, unique, yes, but aware at the time, no. It was, again, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, it was just a gig. Of course it was the Beatles, but was I aware that it was going to turn into a bit of music, filmmaking history? No. I'm highly appreciative, Michael, of having been there and realizing I've had that unique experience. But I'm also, I trust, humble enough to know it wasn't of my making. I've just been the luckiest bugger going.
Well, that's a great line. And a great line to finish on, Les. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, mate. Nice to have met you.
We hope you enjoyed the show. You know the name, look up the socials. You'll find us on Facebook and Instagram where we can all come together. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe and spread the word. It all helps raise the profile of the You Can Talk to Me podcast. Thanks for listening.